Please take your seats, dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Nordic permanent representatives, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you to the first seminar in a series of 3 seminars under the heading Calling Men and Boys into Gender Equality, organized in collaboration with the Nordic Council of Ministers. And I'm really thrilled to see so many of you here with us today. And as the event is live streamed, we hope to reach out to many more in the member states. While the series of seminars is organized by the Nordic countries, where new trends have caught considerable public attention and have led to political discussions on boys and men in gender equality policies, we hope and believe the topic to be recognizable and relevant for all member states. Today's panel will offer a broad spectrum of insights, focusing on challenges met by men and boys and the consequences we see both at societal and at individual levels. Further, we will explore strategies to overcome these challenges and ask how we can turn negative trends. Let us use these 1.5 hours to learn from each other and take away good advice on how to ensure equality for all without allowing for one group's rights to be detrimental to another group's rights. Equality and equal rights are win-win situations. It is not a zero-sum game. It is my honor to introduce our first speaker, State Secretary Erlend Kaldestad Hanstveit, from the Ministry of Culture and Equality in Norway. And State Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Helge, I will say. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, dear friends of gender equality, I wish you all a warm welcome here today. It gives me great pleasure to deliver the opening remarks for the first of 3 Nordic events on calling men and boys into gender equality. Gender equality and non-discrimination policies are linked to common European values and fundamental rights in sustainable and inclusive democracies, as recognized by the heads of states and governments in the Reykjavik Declaration. It is understood that men can be important agents and proponents for women's rights and gender equality. However, gender equality must also be open to look at whether there are areas in life where the boys are left behind. While men do in general earn more than women, own more than women in terms of property and financial capital, and more men than women hold powerful positions in policy and economic positions, not every man or boy will recognize himself in this picture. Statistics show that some boys fall behind, for example in schools, or drop out of school altogether. We must also recognize that some people can face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Discrimination based on gender, disability, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or other grounds can occur at the same time and reinforce each other. Efforts towards gender equality require comprehensive strategies across sectors to effectively combat multiple and complex forms of discrimination. The Nordics are considered as being forerunners in gender equality. The extensive parental leave and benefit schemes in our countries, which allows parents to combine work and family life, is one such example. But we have to ask ourselves the question, have we forgotten to sufficiently address the interests and needs of all men and boys in the public discourse when we are developing gender equality policies? And therefore we ask if we can step beyond what can be understood as the Nordic paradox. Against this background, the Norwegian government appointed a commission, the Men's Equality Commission, tasked with examining equality challenges in Norway faced by men and boys across a wide range of policy areas. The father of the report, Klaus Jervel, will speak more about this in a few minutes, represented here to my right. Promoting equal rights and opportunities should not be perceived as a competition between genders. We strongly believe that society as a whole stands to win from from a balanced gender equality policy. With that, I look forward to listening to the speakers and to the panel debate of today and learn from your expertise. I wish you all a fruitful and interesting discussion, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, State Secretary, for giving us insights into the development of Norwegian policies in this area. Let us now move to our next speaker, Mrs. Maria Ruotanen, Director General of Democracy and Human Dignity in the Council of Europe. Maria, the Council of Europe is important for policy development on gender equality in member states. We look forward to learning more about your perspectives on the topic in front of you today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Looking around this full room, I can see that all of us here are convinced about the necessity to include men and boys in gender equality policies. This is because we are convinced that gender equality must involve and benefit everybody. And this is needed, involvement of everybody is needed to dismantle the harmful stereotypes and gender-based discrimination. And while men are often portrayed as perpetrators of violence, they often are also victims. And I think we have to not overlook that. Also, boys and men experience pressures from rigid gender stereotypes and norms. They are expected to fit a certain mold. And that impacts their mental health, it limits the emotional expression, and restricts the roles in all walks of their lives. And this is why dismantling these harmful stereotypes will benefit everyone. And for this, we need actively involved men and boys as agents of change in reshaping social norms and fostering a culture that promotes respect, equality, and inclusion for all. And actually, in this very room, we have a lot of agents for change, including the State Secretary, who, with his already opening words, but also his role as a former sportsman, I think can play a very, very important role in leading this dismantling of stereotypes. Coming from Finland, you already referred also to Nordic countries being known as gender equally, and being grown up in a very gender equal environment and family, I was really alarmed by a survey that was published in Finland last week only, that claims that 25 of boys and men that are under 35 years consider it normal that women are victims of violence because the way they dress or behave. And I think this is very alarming, and I'm somehow convinced that it cannot be true. It cannot be 25%, but there is certainly some truth in it. And I think this is very worrying because it's also a trend. It's not just in Finland, but I think it's a global trend that we are seeing here. So how can we turn this trend? How can we do it by not making boys and men feel guilty, but making them feel that actually gender equality benefits them, and it's not giving women more rights, that it's away from their rights, as the State Secretary also said. So we have to see also how to address the social media, because I think this is, especially for young men and boys, this is the entry point often that they go into on websites, and it's so much easier to say things and be mean, and also towards others in a way that they don't feel that they are accountable. And that's where they learn the stereotypes. And unfortunately, it's also through social media that many boys and also girls access pornographic sites too easily. And this is why I will not speak too much about the gender equality policies, because I know that there are many who will speak about that. But that is also why the Children's Rights Committee is now working on guidance on making safeguards, or creating safeguards for children in accessing these online pornographic content. And also, linked to that, I think it's very important that we work on, and that's what we are doing on children's rights, on age-appropriate sexual education. It's not normal, that this usually comes through social media, that the first access to sexual education, if we can call it like this, is coming. So I think as a piece of a puzzle, there are many of them, and it's so important, and I'm really grateful for the Nordic countries, and especially Norway, that you put this topic as one of the key themes of your seminars, because it's not obvious. We discussed it earlier when we adopted the recommendation that became Indian guidelines on role of men and boys in gender equality. It's not so obvious that this is put always forward. So I think, from my perspective, we cannot have proper gender equality without involving men and boys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, for your intervention and for all the valuable work undertaken within the Council of Europe. And now it is my pleasure to leave the floor to our panel moderator, Panos Kakaviatos, also from the Council of Europe, who will lead us through the panel discussions. Panos, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. It's an honor for me to be a moderator for the discussions today that are so important to society. It's a very important topic, and it's wonderful that we have such a large audience who will be able to ask questions at the end. We're on a tight schedule, so part of my job is to be the timekeeper as well, unfortunately. But we do have 3 thematic sessions, followed by an interactive discussion and with the panelists, and we'll take questions again from the audience at the very end. So let me start by very briefly introducing the panel. With us today, we have Mr. Klaus Jervel, who mentioned earlier. He's the leader of the Norwegian government-appointed Men's Equality Commission. We also have Ms. Kira Appel, here to my left. She's Director of International Gender Equality, Department of Gender Equality at the Danish Ministry of Environment and Gender Equality. To my right, we have Ms. Stine Helding Rand, psychologist from Denmark with expertise in identity formation processes. Right? Mr. Alexandra Dimitrievich, founder and chairperson of the Maltese NGO Men Against Violence, and member of the steering committee Men Engage Europe. Fine. We also have Mr. Edmund Sepuritis from Latvia. Your name sounds kind of Greek, but it's not, chairperson of the Subcommittee on Gender Equality, Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And Mr. Ralph Kass of Luxembourg, chairperson of the Council of Europe Gender Equality Commission and first-class executive advisor to the Ministry of Gender Equality and Diversity in Luxembourg. But we also have present and the future in a youth panel. We have 2 members of the Advisory Council on Youth of the Council of Europe, Mix Anna Knobut. We also have Miss Roberta Bojan. And in addition, we have Miss Frida Helen. She represents the community of interns of the permanent representation. So welcome to the youth panel. And without further ado, we will now go to the first session. We are going to explore the need for developing gender equality policies, taking into account the challenges that men and boys face. Mr. Jervel, you led the Norwegian government-appointed Men's Equality Commission, which delivered its report in April this year. Could you tell us a bit about the background against which your work came to life, about your main findings, and share the key recommendations for action in 5 minutes? Is that possible?
It's not possible,
okay.
But I can give a very, very short summary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Of course, the appointment of the Men's Equality Commission is based on a recognition that boys and men have not been sufficiently included and safeguarded in the development of Norwegian gender equality policy. So that's why we start our work. And we have called our report the next step for gender equality. And the reason is that we think the next step for gender equality is to include boys and men's equality challenges into the policy, much stronger than today. When I was appointed to the Men's Equality Commission, I experienced something strange because I'm a man, but I haven't been thinking so much about this problem. And I heard there are 2 stories about men and gender equality. One story describes men as a problem for equality, for gender equality. Men are privileged, men are violent, men hinder women's opportunities. That's like one story in one part of the society. Men has to change to be a part of the gender equality. The other story, the second story, is told that equality is a problem for men. Gender equality means that men no longer are allowed to be real men. The equality has gone too far. We have to go back to letting men be men. So the problem with both those stories, as I see it, is they have a very limited view on men. The Men's Commission, our answer is that equality has served men. We think that the equality policy in Norway has served men, but that political initiatives is needed to improve equality also in areas where men fare poorly. And that's what we've checked out. And it's also important that we draw boys and men into the policies, and we have to talk with them and not about them. And that's a very important point. That's how we work with equality, to listen to people's stories. We also need to listen to boys and men's stories. We have been, in our work, examined gender equality challenges across a wide range of policy areas, including education, employment, family life, health, participation in civil life, violence, and social exclusion. And in several areas, boys and men face challenges, whereas a group and are disadvantaged compared to girls and women. For example, in the parts of the education system, they fare poorly, more poorly than girls. Also, opportunities to be equal caregivers. At inequalities among men. Because when we talk about gender equality, men has in many contexts been understood as the norm. The average person against whom all others' equality challenges are measured. And we have failed to recognize the differences among men, both in terms of power and opportunities. Men who have little power and live in poor conditions have not been target for gender equality policy. So a central premise for the Commission's work is that different groups of boys and men may face different types of obstacles for full civic participation. In this report, the Commission has therefore attempted to describe the differences among boys and men, in addition to examining gender differences between men and women. Social inequality is an important factor for understanding these differences. Some challenges affecting persons with lower social-economic status affect boys and men in particular or in distinct ways. So, how much?
You've got another 40 seconds.
Okay. So,
5 pages.
okay. So, and we want to say the experience of marginalization for boys and men can fuel destructive behavior, such as crime, substance abuse, and violence. Such behavior has, to a large extent, been understood as problems related to boys and men, that boys or men are the problem. The Men's Equality Commission believes that much of the destructive behavior must instead be understood as an expression of the problems of boys and men. And these problems must be taken seriously and resolved at a social level in the society. I don't have much time, but I say we have made 4 priority areas for policy measures. One is men as caregivers. You can ask me questions if you want to know more. We want more policies to reduce the gender differences in education and working life. We want policy to focus on men and boys' vulnerability and health. And also we want equality policy for all. That also includes men's challenges. Thank you.
Well, that was terrific. That was 5 minutes and 50 seconds, and that was very useful. And thank you for bringing up these topics about stereotypes and how to deal with that. And thank you, Mr. Gabriel. I now turn to your colleague, Ms. Appel of Denmark, who is the first country recently to have adopted an action plan on men and boys. Action plan. Men and boys, right. Okay, very good. Bravo, bravo. And could you please outline the key elements of your action plan and how has it played out since its introduction? And, well, 5 minutes, I'm resetting the clock.
Well, first of all, let me just thank Norway, the Nordic Council of Ministers, participants, a distinguished panel, everybody here. Isn't it nice to see so many men as well? It's not very often that I see that at a gender equality session, so I'm really excited about that. You know, I've been working with gender equality for 27 years, and I have always stood really firm on the inclusion of men and boys. But I tell you, I've had some opposition. People have told me I've been a traitor, that I don't support women's rights, just because I say that we also have to look at men. Because as the minister, as the state secretary said, it's not, you know, it's a win-win. The cake doesn't get smaller, it gets larger. So let's just agree to that. That's the premise. We all work for both women's rights and for men's rights. So the previous speakers have been telling you the why, what is the problem, and I would like to just show you this action plan because we've been trying to look into the how. How do we move forward? And there's about 20 pages, so I'll take up the time for the rest of the panel. No, there won't be time for me to go through everything. But we have divided this action plan into 4 areas. To fathers, families, to health, to vulnerable groups and social exclusion, and to education. Because these are the 4 areas where we can see that statistics prove that men are disadvantaged. And there's no discussion here. And sometimes I keep on, you know, we keep on having these discussions, but it is indisputable. Men are disadvantaged in some areas of life. So what can we do about it? I'll just give you a few examples from each of these 4 areas. If you look at the family, of course, parental leave and the earmarking of parental leave is crucial because this means that men can become caregivers. They don't have to fight about taking parental leave, and that has been a fight. Women don't want to give it up, and fathers do want to take it. So by earmarking it, you can actually allow fathers to become a caregiver, and that gives him a totally different role with his children. But also small things, like if you send out information about the kid in kindergarten or in the school, it's most often sent to the mother. And you're not aware that then suddenly the mother becomes a caregiver, becomes the organizer, becomes the one responsible for knowing, oh, you have to bring your gymnastic clothes, you have to bring a present, or all of this. You have to send it to both parents. Both parents have to be actively involved in their child's life. So small things like all digital post now in Denmark goes to both mothers and to fathers. Turning to health, yeah, you know, up to 30% of men at the age between 35 to 39 don't have ever or very rarely anybody to confide with and to talk to with outside the family. Did you know that? So many younger men are actually really, really lonely. They've got nobody to talk to. And that's awful. These statistics are absolutely awful. So we've also been looking into how can we engage and how can we also engage the younger men. So we have just one example, you can read the rest in our action plan, but is to involve them in physical gaming setups. So instead of sitting behind the screen at home, you gather them and you actually make them meet each other also in physical life. Because meeting physically can do something else. So that's also small ways of trying to make young men less lonely. Vulnerable and social exclusion, you have to realize that young men in general are homeless, they are lonely, they are at the bottom of society. As we say, men are a time glass, as we talked about earlier. They are at the top of society, and then they are at the bottom of society. Whilst women are apples, like my name, they're in the middle. They might not earn as much, but they're not as excluded either. So what can we do? We have to have support groups. We have to reach out. And we have to, for instance, drive out with health buses to men's job places, because they don't go to the doctor, they don't take care of themselves. But if you drive out to their workplace, yeah, I've got to speed up. I am so sorry. Okay. Also, for men who are subjected to violence in the home, we actually have a lot of men who are subjected to violence. 118,000 women, but 83,000 men. So we have made it now by law that they have the same right to crisis centers and to bring their children to the crisis centers. Okay, I'm going to speak very fast now. No. Also, education and work life. You have to get men into the care sector. We are going to introduce Boys' Day in Care. We are going to introduce promoting men to take care, education within the care system. And then just finishing off, the Nordic Council of Ministers are also very much aware of this growing resistance that we see on gender equality, on LGBT rights. So we have a program now. We have a thing called Pushing for Progress. And what we want to do in the Nordic countries is that we want to stand firmly together and push back on this pushback that we are experiencing. And the growing opposition, we must go forward. Thanks.
Ms. Apple, you went to 7 minutes, but it was so interesting. So, I mean, that was really fascinating address you made. Thank you so much for that. I would like to now turn to Mr. Ralph Kass. You are here first and foremost in the capacity of being chairperson of the Gender Equality Commission, but now I will ask you to speak in terms of the first-class executive advisor to the government of Luxembourg. Just 3 minutes, because you'll talk again later, about your experience and how we can include men and boys in the development of gender equality policies in Luxembourg.
First of all, I feel very discriminated. They had 7 minutes, 5 minutes, and just got 3. I feel some small countries discrimination. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this. I think it's a very important event. And you want the perspective of a small country's experience on integrating men in gender equality. I think you need to have the political will to do something. We started in 2010 by having a new minister, and she had a list of all the centers and shelters for women, and she simply asked the question, well, do we have anything for men or boys? I said, no, not really. And then she said, well, we have to do something. We have to provide an offer and to see how other countries make it. And we went to Germany. We had talks with the Confederacy of Men's Organizations called Bundesforum Männer in order to see how Germany is doing it. We went to France. We went to our neighboring countries. And my minister founded a center called Informant, which is a service for men in distress, with all kinds of distresses. So it can be violence, of course. It can be also job loss. It could be divorce, of course. A lot of kinds of situations. And there was a big resistance from the women's organization side. There was some kind of jealousies expressed towards the creation of that center. But progressively, we installed some kind of a dialogue. I think it's very important these days that both sides speak to each other. What are you doing on the men's side? Does it mean that that you're going to cut budgets on the women's side, or what does it mean? Do you so these kind of discussions. So and I think the dialogue was very important in order to install that service as a very important actor when it comes to gender equality. And then we have also a center for male perpetrators of domestic violence. So we have chosen that approach to work with perpetrators of violence. I think it's very important. There's a reason why they do it. And just to leave them like nobody cares is definitely not the right approach, at least that's our convictions. And tomorrow we have World Men's Day, International Men's Day, which is not an official day at the United Nations, but we take that day as an occasion in order to raise awareness about the necessity to integrate men in gender equality policies by campaigns, by showing video clips on caring masculinities, for instance. There was a huge success with these clips. But on Friday, we're going to create our first center for male victims of domestic violence. And they're going to work together with there's the same organization for the female victims of domestic violence. And both centers are working together. It was a condition that we posed immediately, that you get that center, but you have to work together. And that will work out. I'm quite confident that it is the right approach. I think there is. I can only endorse what my neighbors were saying in Norway and in Denmark. That's a bit how we started, how we progressed within the years, and I think there's no protest anymore on that. Infoman is really well integrated in the social network of Luxembourg. They're working together, organizing seminars, workshops, conferences. But I think it had to go via dialogue, cooperation, and explanation to show what everyone is doing. I think that's very, very important. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's terrific.
In my 3 minutes.
You did great. I mean, 4.5 minutes. That's okay. So I think so. It's Friday. Yeah.
It's on Friday.
Friday. Okay. Okay. Well, now we will turn to the present and the future, the youth panel, and I think you have some questions to pose after this. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for your great first start to the panel, and also a big thank you to the Nordic Council for, I think, centering men in a conversation where they're often sidelined, which they don't need to be. It's a topic of its own that needs to be addressed. And I wanted to start off my question by actually jumping off something that Mr. Javel said, but I would like to open it, of course, also to the other panelists. You talked about how men or boys are, of course, also diverse in their experiences. And I think one thing that I always wonder as a minority myself is that I think in policy-making spaces, there is a factor to which sexuality, your ethnic background, your religion, your socioeconomic status oftentimes can also prevent you from actually accessing policy-making spaces. So I was wondering, how can we actively engage men in their diversity within policy-making spaces?
First, I want to say that one of the findings, I say there are inequality among men. For example, men of immigrant background experience discrimination when they come to public services because they are looked upon as oppressors. You understand? Women experience some discrimination, but for example, if there is a divorce and family, these were very clear when we talked with men. Said we feel they look on us as oppressors. They don't listen to what we say. Just to say, and also discrimination in workplace and this. When it comes to politics, what we found out is that, of course, men are overrepresented in politics. But those who don't really vote, the lowest participation in elections are among young men with low education and immigrants. So when we say, okay, men are represented, but they don't represent all men. So this is what I say, if we are working with equality for men, you can't only look at the gender and take the average man. You have to look upon and have a more direct politics for different groups. But the important is to have knowledge about how it looks, because when it's always the average man, okay, average man earns more than women, they are, you know, but we don't see the other part of, many men are not included in that.
Okay, I think, Frida, you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, I want to second what Roberta said here and thank all of you guys for being here today to discuss this very important topic with us. I think it was very interesting to hear some of the initiatives from Luxembourg, some of the challenges you found in Norway, and also the action plan from Denmark. And I actually have a question to Ms. Appel and Mr. Järvel in this regard. I wanted to ask, what do you guys think are the main challenges in implementing the policies and the recommendations you have found and turn plans into action? Thank you.
Ms. Appel, what did you...
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, there are lots of challenges, of course, and one actually being men themselves, because men are typically regarded as the norm. Men don't see themselves as a sex, as a gender. So mobilizing men to realize that they have problems and that they might be victims is very, very difficult. So it's a matter of sometimes taking a very specific subject, and that's why we made an action plan. Because if you go in and you talk to men as fathers, for instance, you say everybody wants to be a good dad. Yeah, all men can sign up to that. And then, when they go on parental leave, a lot of men feel very lonely. But if you make the same dad groups as you make mom groups, they can talk together and they can exchange views on what it is like to become a dad and the difficulties they encounter. Because men are not as used to, as women, to talk about their personal problems. If you look at health, men don't go to the practitioner, to the doctor. They might be sick, and then they die. And it is statistically that's the way it is, and it's very sad. And the reason why some men go to the doctor is because their wife tell them to go to the doctor, because they are used to being, in charge and used to being able to handle everything. So sometimes it's difficult to actually engaging men. Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, because we're just, the next panel.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Drinks later.
No, I'll try to be shorter. I think the main challenge is that we have to get used to look upon men as a gender, not as a norm. Because then we can easily focus on where the problems are. For example, when boys, in average, in Norwegian, after 10 years in school, they have 4 grades lower than, 10% lower grades than girls. And 2/3 of those who really don't do well in school are boys. If it had been opposite, if it had been girls, we would have understand there is something with how the school is organized that doesn't, it's better for boys than girls. But when it's boys, we say, the boys have problems because they're, we don't look upon it as an area for politics. And I think that's in many areas that you have to see, okay, when we need a change, for example, the father's quota in parental leave has been a great, huge success. is that, it has changed so much, and men are more positive to the father's quota than women. But we have very few examples where we have done active measures to involve men in these questions. So we have to just look upon men as a gender and start to get the knowledge about these questions.
Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to move on to the next session, which addresses harmful stereotypes. I mean, everyone knows girls are smarter than boys, right? So, I'm just saying, which is an interesting segue to addressing stereotypes and norms and bias about men and boys and their negative impact. So, Ms. Helding-Rand, you are a psychologist and author of the report titled The Angry Internet. What are some of the negative stereotypes and norms about men and boys, and how do traditional ideas of masculinity affect their mental health and well-being, relationships, behavior, and their ability to seek help? You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to have to speed talk like everyone else, I guess. So the main issue, one of the main issues, is that the traditional masculine ideal is extremely narrow. There is not much room to move around, to find your own identity, and to make it match, because there is almost no room for diversity within the traditional masculine ideal, making it very hard for boys and men to fit in, because it also kind of sets them up for failure, because you have this very narrow path that you have to walk, and if you wander off it, then maybe you're not a real man. And even though we have the best intentions and we try to raise our boys in very inclusive, very diverse ways to show them that masculinity can be many things, they still meet this ideal everywhere they go. So it's not enough that we do that as parents or as adults around the boys and the young people we deal with. We need to set in on all aspects possible. Like Klaus also mentioned earlier, it's not enough that we do it in the homes. We also have to face it at school. They have to face it at the education system, everywhere. And this very narrow ideal creates a state of masculinity being quite precarious, being quite fragile, meaning that it is not very easy to obtain, and it's also very easily lost again. So there's a constant sense of insecurity of, am I man enough? Am I masculine enough? And with nowhere to put that insecurity. Because, like Kira just mentioned, boys and men are also raised to not talk about their feelings, to not say anything about how they're doing, and to not, and they're also taught it's not okay to not be okay. You have to be okay all the time, and we also leave them with only 2 possible emotions. They can be happy or they can be angry. That's kind of the emotions we teach them. There's no in-between, which leaves absolutely no room to feel how am I actually feeling, and to do something about those feelings, because most of us have a lot of different feelings, not just anger or happiness. I also want to quickly touch upon what Ms. Hope pronounced your name correctly, Ruotanen, mentioned about social media. It's true, it has a big effect. I work in my daily life at the Center for Digital Youth Care in Denmark, where we work with all aspects of the digital lives of young people. And it's true, it has a very, very big impact on gender and on gender equality. But not only in a negative way. It's both good ways and bad ways. Because on the negative side, young people are presented with many different stereotypes online, and they're presented with somewhat narrow ideals of what it means to be a man or a woman, but they're also presented with a very diverse set of ways of being young, of being a human being in today's world. Because the internet, all social media is a platform where you can be whoever you want, and you will meet someone who is like you. It's a place where you can see, oh, I'm not the only one feeling like this. But it's also a place where you can end up in some sort of echo chamber where people show you a very, very, very narrow way of being, and that's the only right way to be.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Wow. That's perfect. Thank you for the timing. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. That's great. Mr. Dimitrievich, I'm really happy that you're here. You're the founder and chairperson of the Maltese NGO Men Against Violence, and you also represent Men Engage Europe. This is a network of organizations with a focus on men and boys to achieve gender justice, correct? And so let's ask you, please, how can we remove barriers and create safe spaces to allow for men and boys to address and to express their vulnerabilities without fear of judgment or shame, because that might be an issue, right? So please, again, 3 minutes.
Yes. So thank you. First of all, thank you to the Nordic Council of Ministers for inviting us. I'm here representing basically Men Engage Alliance. And I'm really, I cannot explain to you how happy I am to hear this being discussed, because Men Engage Europe has been now close to 20 years really working on these things. And we have a range of around 110 NGOs all over European countries tackling all these issues. We have NGOs that work with young parents, the boys that, we talk about teen pregnancies and young mothers and things like that. But what about, there are no programs for them. So we have NGOs that work these kind of things. We have NGOs that work with perpetrators. And we also have an NGO like mine is that works in what we call a primary prevention. So working with teenagers and trying to show them how these forces that bring this gender inequality also have negative effects on them. And because the first act, and sort of try to present to them that this is basically a structure, that it's not a man versus women, that it's basically there is a system, the structure that exists, social structure that has to be dismantled, and that it's harmful to them, okay? So how to get to your question? We know how to get to the boys, to create safe spaces for them. First of all, nowadays, there are no safe spaces. As long as they have an internet connection, there is a rabbit hole. There is algorithms on social media are made. If you don't have any data on your computer, no cookies or anything, if you are very first time, if you're a boy, you type in that you're 16-year-old and you join a social network, randomly, because of your age, 4th, 5th, or 6th video or a post or whatever, it will come from one of these influencers who are sharing this toxic and terrible masculinity just because you're a boy. So there are no safe spaces as long as they have internet. So and the internet and these technologies, it's moving at such a speed that parents cannot catch up with it, schools cannot catch up with it. And so what we have to do, we have to go to them. We have to go where the boys are. So the first thing, and like if you are a government official, what does the government? You have schooling system, you have education system that are perfect vehicle to start off with. But you have to be proactive. You have to, I know I went to the education department of my country 10 years ago and begging them to let me in. And we don't have place in the curriculum. So this is a political question of political will. There are programs that you can reach the boys in schools. You can reach them in places where they gather, sports, Boy Scouts. There are places where boys are, so reach out to those people. Reach out to NGOs. I'm going to keep on repeating that because I'm coming from that side, that have experience, that have been doing this. There are programs that last for 15 intervention over the entire, and there are programs already in place that exist. And at a particular point in time whilst the person is growing up, from the primary school to university, intervention that reinforce over the years the ideas of gender inequality. So boys are crucial to this topic and should be involved, and we need to reach them, and it needs political will, long-term thinking, and it has to be financed. But okay, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much. Yes, long-term thinking and strategy. We now turn again to our youth panel. I think we have a couple of questions. Mix Anna Knobut.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for the Nordic Council of Ministers for creating the space for us today to discuss this very important topic. I have a question for the both of you, because you're sort of both were describing how public institutions are tackling the dismantling of harmful stereotypes. And my question is, how can you go further together with both an institution and young people of all genders? And how can you go further and make sure that the needs and their vulnerabilities are being taken into consideration, and that is further than reaching out to them? So how can you actually make sure that those needs and vulnerabilities are being translated into whatever policy you might call it? Thank you.
Well, I think one very important way to go is to involve youth, involve the boys, involve them themselves. Because, I mean, us as adults can have all these great ideas as to what's the way to go and what will work and what will not work. But if we don't involve the boys themselves, then it's not going to matter. We need to have them on board, and we also need to ask them, well, what do you see as the issue? What do you see as the problem? And how can we focus on that problem? What would be a good way to work with it? Because again, I think all of us have great ideas, but they might not be great in practice, and they might not be relevant to boys in practice.
And I will just add to that, because again, it's moving at the speed that we cannot, sometimes I don't understand. And I think that's why you need to get, first of all, boys as leaders. This is their issue. You young boys can lead on this issue, and once they come, they will know how to reach those that won't listen to me. I mean, I'm coming, and it is coming from, men talking to men that started in 60s and 70s, because men will listen to men more than they will listen to women. So we can get boys to talk to boys and to know how, and creatively, I don't know, whatever is the latest fad or the latest thing, and to lead on it. And the same thing, because you asked something and you mentioned something about minorities who end up being, it's the same thing, how we can get them and it's basically get people from the communities, okay, give them the tools to transfer that knowledge, understanding to the other and get out what they actually needed, how we can actually help. So getting the people, leaders from the communities, not us coming up with ideas that we think are good for them. Same thing with the boys, same thing with minorities.
Yes, so it has to be sort of natural, not top-down. Okay, interesting. So we have a question also from Frida as well.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, going off of what you said about having men speak to other men, I wanted to ask, because also I think it was Ms. Appel who said in the beginning that she was so happy to see so many men here today to talk about gender equality, because it can be quite difficult to motivate take up a space that women claimed for such a long time to get. So my question is, from your experience, how do we motivate men to become active agents of change in regards to gender equality?
So the mic is mine now for the rest of the evening. No, I'll try to be. It's difficult. Okay, it's difficult. Usually it happens very often. Thank you for remarking that there is a number of men in here, because I find myself in the last 10 years often there is a room full of women and then there is me. Okay, and where I work, where I live, people know who I am, so that's never a problem. But it can be, and it's hard. It's hard to motivate men, but it's hard to get to them, my experience, for the first time. That's the difficult part, because men brush it off. Gender, that's something that women deal with, or that's something that affects, that's not me. I'm a good man. I'm a good man. I never do anything wrong, so it's not about me. And but once you manage to have a minute with them, to have a minute of their time and try to break through these stereotypes and expectations, and if they get a minute to, because often what's happening today, they don't recognize it. They don't even recognize it as a problem. And they don't recognize what they hear, what they, I always keep on saying we have to see it as a part of a bigger backlash movement that is happening now against gender equality, against human rights, against many other things, because it's not isolated, and these man groups and what have you, they overlap and try to influence and what have you. But once you manage to get their attention, if you approach it in a correct way, and as I said, there are many ways of talking to men about these things. You can get their interest and you can get them on board. It's difficult first time, but after that, it's doable.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, go, please go ahead.
Real quick, I agree completely, but I was also thinking that I think, like you said, the approach matters. We need to figure out a way of framing it in the right way to get them engaged. Because as soon as it's something gender, something equality, then no thanks, that's not for me. So yeah, so it has to be framed in a way that it appeals to everyone, not to one gender specifically, or stating that. We just did a project also in the EU regarding gender-based violence online, and in the project description, men and boys were the target group. But we made we were very careful not to mention this anywhere we went, because if we did that, then we also made them wrong. We made them perpetrators, which we didn't want to do because we needed to create dialogue. So I think it's very, very important, the framing of whatever you want to do and the approach you take, because it can very easily just become an us versus them and become some sort of war, and that's not what we want.
Yes, we want to avoid wars like that. Yeah. Okay, so I think we have one other question, Roberta.
Yes, I'll try to keep it brief, but I was just wondering, because discussing topics such as gender norms or gender biases, they obviously also affect the way that men navigate roles such as being a parent, being a caregiver, being a partner. And I think the previous panel talked a little bit about the institutional factors that play into this. So if we have regulation that limits men's access to parental leave, then of course that prevents them from being caregivers. But at the same time, I think there's also a cultural factor to gender norms and biases. So I'm wondering how we can support men's role as, for example, a caregiver, as a partner, in the context of family dynamics.
I will just say that, again, there is an umbrella organization called Men Care, okay, which is a sister or brother organization of Men Engage, because there is a lot of overlap in men and membership. And basically, Men Care work on all continents, like Men Engage. The same thing, working in Africa, in Asia, and mostly, but we also work in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe and other places. We had their NGOs that are member of our network that actually work with men and about parenting and so on. But again, it's very important to get the people who are from the culture, from the society, who understand what's going on and how these young boys, because I always think about young parents, about their situation and who are capable of helping them. And yes, for that there needs to be a policy, because if you're not gonna have anybody working with young boys' parents, and getting them into the parenthood, what that means if there is no program for it, and then it falls onto the NGO that only works when they have funding, and so it has to be there has to be part of the strategy, and it's possible, and it exists already.
I agree, and I'm also thinking, like you mentioned it yourself, role models. We need positive role models, and we also need to be ambitious, but also be realistic. We cannot make this change like this. It's not going to happen in one generation, but keeping positive role models and focusing on the long term, then it's possible to create a change. And we need to celebrate also the small changes that we do create, like, for instance, the earmarked parental leave we have in Denmark, or other structural ways of going about it. But I agree, it's not enough. We do need all these other things as well, but I think positive role models is the most important factor.
Thank you both for answering the question, and thank you for the question. Very, very fascinating question. I think we now come to the last session, where we will hear about recent developments from the Council of Europe, this organization, and dig deeper into the role of the organization with regard to promoting gender equality. And I will go first to Mr. Kass, now in your role as being chairperson of the Gender Equality Commission. The same question goes to you. What are the recent developments with the Gender Equality Commission? You have 3 minutes.
You can't be serious.
Well, but I am. But that's
it's
okay.
very impolite, very rude. So no, it's okay. No, it's okay. I try my best to be as brief as possible. So just to mention, we are a commission where we just have 6 men and 40 women in our commission. And there were times where we were more numerous as men, but maybe that's the trend of the time, that men are not as committed as it was before, but this needs further analysis. On recent developments, we worked on 2 major texts that are quite crucial and quite. First was the gender equality strategy that we adopted. That was adopted in March of this year, and it had a reference on guidelines on men and equal and gender equality, and that was adopted under the presidency before, held by my colleague from Portugal. And I think that was a milestone, although I must say a very shy and very delicate step forward. But it is a step forward. It was, I think there was some kind of pressure as well in order to move forward and to integrate that discussion on men and gender equality, because we reached a certain degree of a consolidated approach on gender equality and the promotion of women's rights, that it was necessary to some point. Well, we have to talk about men and boys as well, and that was hard work, I have to say, and we had very harsh discussions also in the commission. It was not so harmonious than I thought, and I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that commission. I started in 2010, and it was no way talking about men and gender equality at that time. It was quite chilly in that. In the meetings of these times, but it evolved. Thanks also to some colleagues from the northern region of Europe to start to be more resolute and to more strong and more stronger in our positions, that we have to integrate men and gender equality. And yeah, and it was hard work, but now we have these guidelines, putting much emphasis on this allies aspect, and not as much as that men could be also victims of all kinds of distresses, and starting with violence, of course. Dimension. But at the same time, also as a Gender Equality Commission, you have to keep focus that many gender inequalities affect mostly women. So I don't want to be misunderstood in what I'm saying. I think also an organization like the Council of Europe has to weigh very carefully what direction it goes. It is what it is. It is Council of Europe. It's also policies. So it's the art of diplomacy, what you can achieve and what you cannot achieve. But that shouldn't prevent us as national experts to share experiences and to show how it can work, and then see what kind of a compromise we can find on topics like this. So I think that sums it up in 3 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're amazing. Thank you. And it's like some people say, evolution, not revolution. Okay. Well, now I would like to please turn to Mr. Sepuritis, so you can speak about the accomplishments as chairperson of the Subcommittee on Gender Equality at the Parliamentary Assembly. Could you give us a brief overview, 3 minutes, of recent developments on the issue of men and boys and gender equality at the Assembly? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll definitely be more proud about accomplishments of my predecessor because I'm very new to this role. And but the work of the Assembly has been quite long-standing on this issue. Actually, this is the same room where the parliamentarians meet, and I spend a lot of time in my political group. And usually, we have the issue of how to fill this room with more women, because the parliamentarians in European countries are mostly men. But of course, there are some rooms that need to be filled with more men. And this discussion is one of those. Of course, the equality committees in parliaments are others. And then generally this equality work and also care work, whichever room that sort of work takes place, of course, these rooms need to be filled with more men. And luckily, the Assembly takes quite an active role into that. As protecting the human rights, then of course a lot of our work is more focused on preventing violence against women and girls. The recent report adopted last year was called The Role and Responsibility of Men and Boys in Stopping Gender-Based Violence Against Women and Girls. And basically the panel previously already told a lot of the calls that the Assembly has made to all of the member states, including creating spaces where to talk to men, creating prevention programs for the potential abusers. And I think in a lot of those calls, there's this understanding that there's a wide diversity and there are a lot of calls for different groups of men. So I'm very lucky to hear that there's a confluence of opinions on that show. And as I mentioned, of course, a lot of the parliamentarians in the Council of Europe member states are men, so that's also be role models, sometimes also maybe create a lot of tension talking to their constituents. But we have also, as an Assembly, stressed that we can promote mindful masculinities and instead of harmful masculinities, and that these parliamentarians can be role models for that and also can contribute to creating more of the role models for that idea and a lot of the work that has been mentioned here as well. And one thing I wanted to stress, to sort of go back to the basics, of course, the Assembly is also still very active in calling for ratification and implementation of Istanbul Convention. And today, just a bit of side note, is also Independence Day in Latvia, where I come from. And luckily, it's the first Independence Day where we can celebrate that we have ratified the Istanbul Convention. It will soon celebrate 1 year anniversary. And also, luckily, some work on implementation is already happening, as we have penalized sexual harassment quite recently in legislation. That's an initiative coming directly from the Parliament. So I just wanted to connect to that these calls for setting the basics straight, they also have very, very large importance. And in finalizing my speech, just to name the headlines of the reports that are currently under preparation in the Assembly, and just the headlines really, and you can probably see. So we have new reports currently in preparation: eliminating gender stereotypes in the media, sexual violence against men and boys, promoting the Istanbul Convention and improving its implementation, building on lessons learned, artificial intelligence and gender equality, risks and challenges, and violent pornography. So just to summarize, I wanted to invite you all to engage with Assembly in this work, and we can discuss these important topics. And of course, there are many avenues how to bring about that change, and the Parliamentary Assembly here in Council of Europe tries to use our special channels through parliamentarians, of course also pushing governments and using our unique scope to speak to all of the member states and achieving maybe smaller changes here and there, but altogether the numbers are quite large in the work that we can do. And so, yes, I can just invite you to help us do that even better.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Latvia, number 39. So we're almost at 40 ratifications for the Istanbul Convention. And mindful masculinity. Yeah, that's a, yeah. We do have questions from the youth panel. So why don't we start with that? Maybe Frida, would you like to? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anna. Yeah.
Thank you, Frida, for the space, and of course, moderator. Mr. Kaas, I have a question, of course. Very good. Please be scared of my question. No, you talked about terminology and giving a direction of the work that the Council of Europe is doing. And I know it goes further than just violence, or not just violence, but goes further than violence, and it's just zooming in. But my question is really about what impact do you think it has that the Council of Europe mostly uses violence against women or violence against men rather than gender-based violence as a term such as that, in the way that masculine people seek help after violence against them has happened?
Well, I can only refer to the definition that it's in the Istanbul Convention, and that was a convention that was clearly directed towards women and girls. And I think it was questionable, but I think that was a thought move, to name it like that. My country, for instance, had some resistances to not to ratify it, but to add at least the questioning, why aren't we at least addressing boys in that convention and not just girls? But I think it was that, I say that as a national representative, I have to pay attention on that. But I think that was a very well reflected move to keep it like that and to focus on violence against women because of this massive over representation of women, female victims of violence against women. So now, of course, you can talk about violence against men as well, but I think the convention opens the door there as well. In the preamble, it is said that you can apply all the measures that are in the convention also to boys and men, and I think that has at least given us some kind of a legal background on how we ground our work with male victims of violence, for instance. So why not using the gender-based violence? I think every national state can do whatever they want to do, and for instance, Luxembourg is working on a national action plan on gender-based violence. So we are more focused on that terminology, which is, I think every country can do what they want to do. So it is. I don't know if I have answered your question, but I think that's pretty much it. What's to say?
Is that all right? Next question. Oh, please, Maria.
Can I just add? I think we often forget, but the title of the convention also includes domestic violence. So that's. I think we can refer to that one as well.
Frida.
Yeah, I have a question because tomorrow is the International Men's Day, and when we were preparing for this seminar, we learned that this day has become a bit of a controversial day because it's been claimed by anti-feminist men's rights movements, and I feel it's quite typical. The second you start talking about men's rights, people's minds turn to certain people. Like Andrew Tate was the third most Googled person in the world last year. And so I wanted to ask, how do we prevent these anti-feminist men's rights movements from overshadowing legitimate conversations about men and gender equality like the one we're having here today?
It's there again. You cannot shut them up. I mean, they have a right to speak. They have a right to organize, to have their movements, men's rights movement. They've been around, and unfortunately, they actually do a great disservice to men because they are very good in coming up with statistics and saying stuff, what is them, but they don't provide solution. They just like to point fingers and blame. Blame women, blame this, blame that, and but no strategy, no plan. And actually, yes, they're doing a massive disservice to men in general. How do you tackle them? You have to fight disinformation. You have to have positive examples contrary to what they are. we in Men Engage, we are currently working on it. We are creating a working group to fight the backlash, which includes what can we as men organization or organization that work with men, what can we do to counteract this influence they have. But the only thing, it's hard because for me to explain, I need to deconstruct the issues that are related in men's or related to men, and they are multifaceted, and they're coming from also economic upbringing, social, and so on and so forth. Whilst one Tate or one whatever the name of that psychologist can just say something, women are stupid, and they go, and we don't have that language. We don't have the opportunity to boil it down to the lowest common denominator. We need more time. So again, you're coming back to having to approach it comprehensively from the state side, having political will, determination to finance it, getting on board people in the know, NGOs and people who work with in the media or for the media, getting young people especially involved, and basically trying to come up with multifaceted, complex, but comprehensive way of tackling this, and always looking long term.
Yes, please, go ahead.
We
also have Mr. Yarvel.
Yes. Quick comment. Super quick comment. I agree we need to counteract, but we also need to be prepared to talk to the boys who actually think that these men are right, who actually agree with people like Andrew Tate. We need to be prepared to have an open and curious discussion with them instead of judging them, because as soon as we judge them, then they're going to back off and say, well, Andrew Tate is obviously right. So we need to be prepared to help them think critically about what they're meeting, but also be prepared to say, okay, that's your beliefs. Interesting. Tell me a bit more about that.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Yarvel.
I agree very much with the last speaker. The problem is that the only guys who have been talking with some of these men for a long time are Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson. Because the people who are concerned about equality, they have been telling men what a problem they are. I believe that very much. So the first is that you're interested in their views, but then you also take them seriously and discuss when you don't agree. And one of my really good experiences after I finished the work with the Men's Commission is that there have been so many interesting discussions with men. I work in a male-dominated blue-collar trade union, and I'm invited everywhere, not because I want to discuss, and men talk about their experience from school, because these are not high-educated people, how they didn't felt like losers. They talk about divorces, the role as father, about their mental health, because they say this is the first time we can talk about this. And so my worry, I think we can't stop Andrew Tate on this, but we can open our part of the floor and say, we have to start this discussion. And then we have, as you say, we can't judge, we can't be afraid of somebody using wrong words. We have to talk and we have to learn from each other. And I think it's possible, but we don't have so much time. We need to hurry up.
I know, it's unfortunately, but I guess Ms. Apple wants to add one more thing. I know.
I didn't talk about the meeting, more the political situation.
We have a couple of questions, and then we have audience. Limit that. Go ahead.
Well, just to say that we have to offer them another brotherhood. Because that's what Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson are doing. And we have to offer them something instead. And we can even see that it starts in kindergarten. We have data in our action plan that proves that when small boys are met in kindergarten, they see the girls being greeted with a hug, and they are not hugged. So we all have to look at each other and ourselves. We are all mothers, we are all fathers. Hug your boy, thank you.
Okay. Give a hug, not just to a tree, boy. Okay, sorry, it was a bad joke. Another question.
Yes, I'll keep it super brief. My question was to Mr. Sepuritis. I was planning to ask my question a bit more general about the role that parliamentarians play in pushing forward the gender equality topics, but I think you kind of covered that in your panel earlier. But what I did want to ask is, of course, today is the first part of a series of events on centering boys and men in this discussion, but it is quite a new topic, actually. I perceive it to be a quite new topic. So I was wondering how specifically, or what the role of parliamentarians could be in pushing forward this idea of centering men and boys in a gender equality discussion as well.
Right, it's a very broad question. I think there's a lot of insights here that parliamentarians can then push for, because I myself as parliamentarian, I come from a different professional field. I don't have the sort of expertise and the knowledge and experience to design the best approaches for policy. But what parliamentarians can do is to use, I think, different tools to help highlight these issues. For example, show what the harms for society, also in financial terms, are to harmful stereotypes, to develop more of the language and understanding of what this mindful masculinity is, what harmful masculinity is, and of course there's also a slight shift of the terms to make them more approachable. So I think the role of the parliamentarians is if they have the sort of background and expertise which some parliamentarians have, is of course then to maybe try to push policy makers in very specific directions. But for majority of parliamentarians, I think it's just work, which we also from Assembly try to support, is to pick up these pieces of information and create a larger story. And maybe to also answer to the previous question a little bit, not allow these hard-fought days and principles and for example family values to be sort of reclaimed by the forces who do not support human rights.
I would like to thank the panelists, our youth panel and our keynote speakers for their insights into this important topic. And I think this question and answer was really interesting. We've learned so much, and food for thought, right? Food for thought. I think it's really, really good. I think we're running late here. We're supposed to end at 18:30. I'm told we can go to 18:40. So why don't we go to audience questions, and we'll just have as many as we can, one by one. You can ask the panelists you want to ask, but we got to keep it pretty quick. And the panelists will have about 2 minutes to answer, and I'll keep it tight. So open the floor to audience questions until 18:40. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you for this great seminar, and thank you to the Nordic Council of Ministers. I would like to hear your thoughts on an area which you haven't mentioned so far, the workplace. And here it might not be a matter of having open conversations. If you think of sought-after positions in the workplace, this tends to, of course, this issue the gender equality tends to increase competition between the different actors, including women. So having gender equality in the workplace may be adverse to the objective interest of men. And this has been studied by a number of economists and sociologists. So what do you make of the workplace when it comes to gender equality?
You're right. Gender equality has been like women are taking the men's place. But one of our focus is that we need a lot of more men into teaching, health work and social work, because they are so totally female dominated. And the problem is for men that when they meet this, they're not represented in the services there that should help them. So we need to do more where men are underrepresented is one thing. And we also make sure that if we prioritize women, it's on the right grounds. We, in our commission, we support, quote, more gender-balanced workplaces. The other thing we have done is that we support a quite large program to make better job of family balance in male-dominated workplaces, because we see that, because we are concerned about men as caregivers, and we see it's a huge difference between female-dominated sectors and male-dominated sectors, how much they make it possible to find this balance. So and the third thing is that we want a huge program for against sexual harassment, and for better psychosocial work environment for all workplaces. Because as men need some, environment to be open about their mental problems, and we think the workplace can be important.
Thank you. We actually have 30 seconds, and you wanted to raise a point. 30 seconds, if you can.
Well, sometimes I think we're talking about making new types of masculinities. And what we've realized is that a lot of modern men, they are open towards changing also the view on their workplace. They have been brought up with the ideal of the man being the breadwinner, the man having the career, but being allowed to actually take parental leave, to take a step back, allows them to not have that enormous responsibility. And that's a possibility for men. Okay. 20 seconds.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, next question. I think, right there. Please, in the back. Could you say your name and yes, hello. Okay.
Thank you. It's such an interesting discussion. I'm sure we could speak for another 2 hours. I have a question to, in fact, everyone. Sorry, I'm Nadia Hashmi from the United Kingdom delegation. I wanted to know, in the course of your research, I'm conscious that we're sort of European countries, and we've been acclimatized to the idea of talking about equality and also about the role of men. I just wondered, in the course of your research, if you've gone beyond Europe or the region that is in the room, and what kind of challenges there are, because I imagine even within the European region, and you've talked about your own countries, there is so much resistance still to this idea. It's still a new idea. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about the sort of cultural context, and whether you think that's a real challenge, or whether you think these kinds of discussions need to be adapted according to the country that we're having the discussions in. Thank you.
Who would want to handle that one?
Men Engage has members, I believe, from around 40 of, actually, we are not EU, we are Euro-based. Every program, that's the whole idea. It's a network. So somebody does something, we share, and then the meetings are all about if this can be adjusted and adopted that works in my cultural, political, and whatever setting. And that also applies internationally. There are programs that are very simple and that they work everywhere, like White Ribbon, which was very strong in UK actually, which is very simple. It's a man just giving pledge that they won't be violent. There is no much. But the other programs that work somewhere else might not work in a different setting, in different political, social, cultural, and so on and so forth. But there is always, that's why you always need people, the cultural negotiators, people from the environment. Is it a country? Is it a community? Are you working with boys? Are you working with people who are working on construction sites, or are you working with military? Or are you working, to deconstruct the notion of masculinity? But can always be, tried and tested and see if it works and moved on.
Thank you very much. That was quick. It was 1 minute. Any other questions, please? Back there, please. Yes, sir. Please state your name and your question.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Gerasimos Dontas. I'm the Deputy Permanent Representative from Greece. My name is Gerasimos Dontas. I'm the Deputy Permanent Representative of Greece. Thank you very much for today's event. It's very interesting, especially from the region where I come from. It brings much hope. One of the panelists has spoken about the new masculinity and which is open to change. And, in my region, usually we say it takes two to tango. So don't you think that this new masculinity has come hand in hand with some kind of new feminism that will offer, as one of the panelists says, another brotherhood, different from what you called mindful masculinity, something that is not so much victimizing, but cooperating with and open to change, so that it can help also men to be better, I mean, in these roles that you already referred to. Thank you.
Who would like to handle that one? Anybody else? Yes? Yeah?
I can always speak.
Ms. Apple?
Yeah. Thank you very much, and a very good question, because we definitely need to tango. And that's why I, for several years now, have talked about creating a new and modern gender equality policy, because we do need to look ahead. However, we also need to acknowledge what we stand on, and the feminist movement is groundbreaking. It has been the biggest movement almost in time that has been able to change the way that women's position has been in society. So we also have to acknowledge that, and that women have fought, and not put the responsibility of men's gender equality in their hands as well now. So men have to also take their responsibility. But let me say that in Denmark, it's been a journey. And when we made this, it was not just made out of sort of in the spare of the moment. It's something that's been prepared for a long time. And we have also the backup and the support of feminist organizations. And I think that's very, very important. All the organizations in Denmark now, they actually realize, the feminist organizations, they support the men's organizations. So but that is a journey. And dialogue is definitely the first part, because most of the time you think that you have one cake, and if you take a slice of it and give it to men, then you have less. But that is not the case. The cake gets bigger, and you have to have that dialogue with both women's and men's organizations. Thanks.
I think we might have to just wrap up the questions, because there's also a short presentation that the ambassador would like to make. And I want to thank everyone for this discussion, for the questions that have been asked. And if there are other questions, there's a get-together later at the cocktail. You can ask panelists. So thank you to everyone, to the audience here with us present. And Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Panos, for having led us through this discussion. And I would also like to thank our eminent panelists and keynote speakers. And we should give them all an applause, please. And as I said at the outset in my introduction, this is the first of 3 Nordic seminars on calling men and boys into gender equality. And I would now like to turn to my Icelandic colleague, Ambassador Ragnhildur Arnaldsdóttir, for her to say a few words about the next seminar to be held in January, and thereafter to Ambassador Therese Hydén of Sweden about the 3rd seminar next spring. So, Ragnhildur, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helge, and I would like to thank Norway for organizing this first event, and not least Kari for your leadership on how you prepared it. And thanks to all the speakers today, Helge reminding us that it's a win-win situation, and Kira for saying it will become a bigger cake, and also Ralph Kass, you said that in your 3-minute small country intervention that we need political will. And Iceland is therefore planning the next Nordic men and boys and gender equality event during the PACE winter session in January 2025. Edmund, you discussed this and the role, and others questioned how can we go forward. And our aim is to bring together politicians throughout Europe, and we are looking in cooperation with PACE at a possible event that would be held as a meeting of the PACE Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination with Dr. Gary Barker, President and CEO of the Ecumindo, among guest speakers, and we might actually be discussing the concept men care. And as you all heard, in the Council of Europe and PACE and the Committee of Ministers, we've all been discussing this gender equality strategy 2024-2029 is including men and boys. So we, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Finland, and Sweden are looking forward to continue to discuss this very relevant and important topic, and we're just beginning.
Thank you, Ragnhildur. And now to Ambassador Teresa Hyden of Sweden. Teresa, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Helge. And it's been such a pleasure to be here this evening, and that's why it's a pleasure to say that there will be more panels, more seminars coming up. But I think we all walk away from this evening with our eyes and minds more open and attuned to these questions. And what we want to do as a sort of a working title for the seminar later in the spring next year is to talk more about online hate speech, cyber violence, and perhaps the algorithm issue as well. I think we should bring the inspiration from this seminar and the one that will be held in January to prepare, to continue to prepare. But it's been really excellent, and a big thanks to the youth panel questions this evening as well. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you, and thank you to the audience. As the debate has shown here today, there is more to be discussed. So save the dates, everyone. It is now time to say thank you and goodbye to those that have followed us online, and to the rest of you. We continue now. You are all welcome to join us in the Nordic reception that will take place in the CM foyer, where you will also be able to continue the discussions and where drinks and food will be served. Thank you very much.
Yeah.